The foreclosure notices hit every mailbox in Sunset Harbor Estates at exactly 3 p.m. on a gray November afternoon, and I watched from my lakefront deck as 247 families simultaneously discovered they had 30 days to pay their overdue HOA fees or lose their homes. The irony was perfect. Brenda Walsh, the woman who'd spent 6 months trying to steal my waterfront property through bogus rental demands, was about to learn that I owned the mortgage notes on every single house in her precious community. The panicked phone calls started within minutes. My assistant fielded dozens of frantic homeowners begging for payment extensions, rate modifications, anything to avoid losing their family homes over HOA assessments they couldn't afford. But the call I'd been waiting for came at 4:17 p.m. when Brenda's shrill voice cracked through my phone speaker like breaking glass. "You can't do this. This is extortion. I'll have you arrested." I smiled as I sipped my coffee, watching the sunset paint my private lake in shades of gold and crimson, the same lake Brenda had claimed I didn't have the right to enjoy without paying her tribute. "Brenda, I'm just following standard mortgage procedures. When borrowers default on their obligations, foreclosure is the appropriate remedy. I learned that from you, actually." What Brenda Walsh didn't know was that 3 years ago, when Sunset Harbor's original developer went bankrupt, I'd quietly purchased the entire portfolio of HOA mortgage notes through my investment company. Every house payment, every refinancing loan, every home equity line of credit in the neighborhood, they all flowed through accounts I controlled. She'd picked a fight with the man who literally owned her community. But this story starts 10 months earlier, with something as innocent as wanting to install a dock on the lake I'd been enjoying peacefully for 15 years. I'd bought my house in 2009, back when Sunset Harbor was just another struggling subdivision trying to recover from the housing crash. The lakefront lot had been a steal at $180,000, mainly because the previous owner was facing foreclosure and needed to sell fast. The house was modest, a 3-bedroom ranch with a small dock and about 150 feet of pristine waterfront on Mirror Lake. What made the property special wasn't the house itself, but the lake access and the incredible sunsets that painted the water every evening. I'd spent countless peaceful mornings fishing from my dock and quiet evenings grilling on my deck, watching wildlife and feeling grateful for the slice of paradise I'd managed to afford. The HOA had been dormant for years after the developer's bankruptcy, with no active board and minimal maintenance requirements. Most residents were just happy to have stable property values and functioning utilities. The community covenants were basic: maintain your property, don't disturb your neighbors, and contribute to essential services like road maintenance and snow removal. It was exactly the kind of low-drama neighborhood I'd been looking for. That changed in early 2023 when Brenda Walsh moved in. Brenda had purchased the largest house in the development, a sprawling 4,500 square foot colonial on the hill overlooking the lake, and immediately set about improving the community to match her vision of suburban perfection. Within 6 months, she had organized an HOA board election, gotten herself elected president, and began implementing what she called enhanced community standards designed to protect property values and maintain neighborhood character. My first encounter with Brenda came on a warm Saturday morning in March, when I was replacing some rotted boards on my dock. I'd been at it for about an hour, enjoying the peaceful work and the sound of water lapping against the pilings, when I heard the sharp click of heels on my gravel driveway. "Excuse me, but do you have permits for that construction work?" I looked up to see a woman in her mid-50s, dressed like she was attending a board meeting instead of walking around a lake neighborhood. Perfectly styled blonde hair, designer blazer, and a clipboard that she held like a weapon of authority. "Permits? I'm just replacing some boards." "Same dock that's been here for 20 years. Brenda's smile had the warmth of a tax audit. Actually, Mr. Peterson, any structural modifications to lakefront property require advance approval from the Architectural Review Committee. I'm Brenda Walsh, your new HOA president. Nice to meet you, Brenda. But this isn't a structural modification, it's basic maintenance on existing infrastructure. I'm afraid that's not how our enhanced guidelines interpret dock work. Any alteration to waterfront structures requires committee review, engineering assessments, and neighbor impact studies. I set down my hammer, trying to process what this woman was telling me. Neighbor impact studies? For replacing 3 boards on my own dock. Mr. Peterson, waterfront property affects the entire community's enjoyment of our lake resource. We have to ensure that individual modifications don't compromise the collective benefit. The way she said our lake resource made my skin crawl. Mirror Lake was a natural body of water that existed long before Sunset Harbor was developed, and my property deed specifically included riparian rights and lake access dating back to the original 1950 S-Land survey. Brenda, with respect, I own this waterfront lot. The lake access comes with my deed. Her smile got sharper. Actually, Mr. Peterson, I think you'll find that our community covenants are quite clear about shared water resources and collective stewardship responsibilities. That afternoon, I spent 3 hours reading through the original HOA covenants, looking for any language about shared water resources or restrictions on dock maintenance. What I found was standard boilerplate about property maintenance and architectural consistency, nothing that would prevent me from maintaining my own dock on my own waterfront. But I also found something interesting in the fine print, a clause stating that all community assessments and special fees require approval by majority vote of affected homeowners. It was a detail that would become very important later. The violation notice arrived 2 days later, certified mail with all the official ceremony Brenda could muster. NOT, ICEOF, COVENANTV, IOLAT, IONUNA, UTHORIZ, EDW, a TERFRONT, CONSTR, UCTION blazed across the top in bold letters. According to Brenda's 3-page document, my dock repair violated 17 different sections of the newly updated architectural guidelines, from visual harmony requirements to environmental impact standards to community resource protection protocols. The fine was $500, with daily penalties until I removed the unauthorized modifications and submitted proper applications through the Architectural Review Committee. I called my attorney, Marcus Chen, who'd handled my property purchase and various business matters over the years. Marcus, can an HOA really regulate maintenance on existing structures? Generally, no. Basic maintenance and repair of existing infrastructure is usually protected as a property right, but HOAs can sometimes impose new restrictions if they follow proper procedures and don't violate state law. What about this committee approval requirement? That depends on your original covenants and how they've been modified. Has there been a community vote on these new guidelines? I checked my records. No vote, no notice of covenant changes, no community meetings about architectural standards. Brenda had apparently written new rules unilaterally and was enforcing them as if they'd been part of the original agreement. Marcus, I think we've got a problem with procedural compliance. Send me everything you've got. If she's imposing new restrictions without following proper amendment procedures, her enforcement actions might be invalid. That night, I walked out to my dock, the same dock I'd been maintaining for 15 years, and wondered how a simple board replacement had turned into a legal battle with someone who thought she owned the lake. But Brenda was just getting started with her campaign to control every aspect of waterfront life in Sunset Harbor. The escalation came fast and relentless. Within 2 weeks of my initial violation notice, I received demands for environmental impact assessments on my dock repairs, structural engineering reports for what amounted to replacing a few boards, and community consultation meetings to discuss the visual impact of maintenance work. Each demand came with fees: $800 for the environmental assessment, $1,200 for engineering review, $300 for community consultation processing. It was bureaucratic warfare designed to make basic property maintenance financially impossible. But the real bombshell came in early May when I found a certified letter in my mailbox that made my blood run cold. NOT, ICEOF, WATERFRONT, USAGE, FAASSASSMENT. According to Brenda's latest legal creation, all properties with direct lake access would now be subject to monthly waterfront usage fees of $450 per month, designed to compensate the community for exclusive enjoyment of shared water resources. $450 per month? For using the lake access that came with my property deed and that I'd been paying property taxes on for 15 years. I read the notice 3 times, trying to understand the legal theory behind charging homeowners rent for using their own lakefront property. The document cited community equity principles and shared resource stewardship as justification for what amounted to extortion. But buried in the fine print was the real purpose. Funds collected through waterfront usage fees will be allocated to community enhancement projects as determined by the Architectural Review Committee. Brenda had found a way to tax lakefront properties to fund her pet projects, and she was using bureaucratic language to disguise theft as community improvement. I called Marcus immediately. They want to charge me $450 a month for lake access that's included in my property deed? That's insane. David, they can't charge usage fees for property rights that are explicitly included in your deed. This isn't a community resource. It's your private riparian rights. Can they actually enforce this? Not legally, but they can make your life miserable trying. HOA boards have broad enforcement powers, and even illegal actions can be expensive to fight if they're willing to drag it through court. That night, I sat on my deck watching the sunset paint Mirror Lake in shades of orange and purple, and I realized that Brenda Walsh was trying to steal my home one fee at a time. What she didn't know was that I had resources she couldn't imagine. See, my day job was managing investment portfolios for high net worth clients, specializing in distressed asset acquisition and mortgage-backed securities. I'd built a small fortune over the years by identifying undervalued properties and mortgage notes, particularly in markets affected by economic downturns. 3 years earlier, when Sunset Harbor's original developer filed for bankruptcy, I'd been following the proceedings through professional interest. The company had leveraged itself into oblivion during the housing boom, and when values crashed, they'd been left holding dozens of unfinished developments and hundreds of mortgage notes they couldn't service. The bankruptcy auction had been a fire sale, with institutional investors snapping up entire portfolios at cents on the dollar. I'd put in a modest bid on the Sunset Harbor mortgage package, mainly because I lived there and wanted to ensure stable ownership of the community's financial infrastructure. To my surprise, I'd won the entire portfolio for $2.3 million, 247 mortgage notes, with a face value of over $38 million. The previous owner had been desperate for liquidity and willing to accept any reasonable offer. For 3 years, I'd been collecting mortgage payments from my neighbors without them knowing it. The loans were serviced through a third-party company, and most homeowners had no idea their notes had changed hands during the bankruptcy proceedings. Which meant Brenda Walsh had just declared war on the man who owned her mortgage. But I wasn't ready to reveal that card yet. First, I wanted to see exactly how far Brenda was willing to push her extortion scheme. The answer came in late June, when she filed a lion against my property for unpaid waterfront usage fees, totaling $1,350 for 3 months of violations. a lion on my property, for refusing to pay rent on lake access that was already mine. Marcus was furious when I showed him the filing. David, this is beyond aggressive, it's illegal. You can't file liens for made-up fees that have no basis in law or contract. What are my options? We fight it, obviously. File a motion to remove the lion, seek damages for abuse of process, maybe pursue criminal charges for fraudulent filings. But it'll take months and cost thousands of dollars. That's when I decided it was time to stop playing defense and start playing offense. Marcus, what if I told you there was a faster way to resolve this? What do you mean? What if the person trying to line my property was actually defaulting on their own mortgage obligations? Marcus looked confused. David, what are you talking about? That evening, I pulled up the mortgage servicing records for every property in Sunset Harbor Estates. What I found was a pattern that made me smile. Dozens of homeowners were behind on their HOA assessments, which meant they were technically in default on their mortgage covenants, including Brenda Walsh, who owed $2,847 in unpaid special assessments from her own community enhancement projects. Under standard mortgage terms, HOA assessment defaults constituted grounds for acceleration, meaning I could demand immediate payment of the entire loan balance or initiate foreclosure proceedings. I had the legal authority to foreclose on Brenda's house over the same types of fees she was trying to steal from me. But I had a better idea. The next morning, I called Jennifer Morrison, the president of Sunset Harbor's mortgage servicing company. Jennifer, this is David Peterson from Peterson Investment Group. I need to discuss some compliance issues with the Sunset Harbor portfolio. Of course, Mr. Peterson. What can we help you with? How many properties are we talking about? Jennifer, I'm not accelerating anything yet. I'm simply exercising my right to demand compliance with mortgage terms. If borrowers can bring their accounts current, there's no problem. If they can't, I smiled, thinking about Brenda's lion on my property. Well, that's what foreclosure procedures are for. The foreclosure notices went out on a Tuesday morning in November, and the community panic was immediate and absolute. 47 families simultaneously discovered they were 30 days away from losing their homes over unpaid HOA fees that ranged from a few hundred to several $1,000s. The servicing company had included clear instructions: bring your account current within 30 days or face foreclosure proceedings. Most homeowners had no idea they were behind on assessments, since Brenda's board had been terrible at maintaining financial records and communicating with residents. Some hadn't received bills, others had been disputing charges, and many had simply ignored what they assumed were more of Brenda's bogus fee demands. But mortgage default was a different category of problem entirely. The phone calls started within an hour. My assistant fielded dozens of panicked homeowners begging for payment plans, extensions, anything to avoid losing their family homes. Some were crying, others were angry, and a few were threatening legal action over what they assumed was predatory mortgage manipulation. Mr. Peterson, please. We never got notice about these assessments. My kids go to school here. Can't we work something out? Sir, I've been current on my mortgage payments for 12 years. How can you foreclose over HOA fees I didn't know I owed? This has to be a mistake. Nobody told us the HOA fees were part of our mortgage obligations. Each call broke my heart a little because these weren't deadbeat borrowers trying to avoid their obligations. These were families caught in the crossfire of Brenda's war against responsible homeowners. But I had a plan to solve their problems and destroy Brenda's tyranny at the same time. The call I'd been waiting for came at 4:17 p.m., right on schedule. Peterson Investment Group, this is David. YUCANTOTHAS. Brenda's voice was so shrill it could have shattered glass. This is extortion. Market manipulation? I'll have you arrested for predatory lending practices? Brenda, I'm simply following standard mortgage procedures. When borrowers default on their obligations, foreclosure is the appropriate remedy. These people aren't defaulting. They're just behind on HOA assessments because your accounting is deliberately confusing. My accounting? I laughed. Brenda, you're the HOA president. The assessment notices come from your board. You know what I mean? You're manipulating mortgage terms to terrorize innocent families? Actually, I'm enforcing mortgage terms that protect property values and community stability. I learned about the importance of financial responsibility from you, remember? All those lectures about paying fees and following procedures? There was dead silence on the line. Wait, you're the mortgage holder? Every single note in Sunset Harbor Estates. Including yours, by the way. You're $2,847 behind on special assessments, which puts your mortgage in default under Section 12.3 of your loan agreement. I could hear Brenda breathing hard, trying to process the implications of what I'd just revealed. This is impossible. The developer held those mortgages. The developer went bankrupt 3 years ago. I bought the entire portfolio at auction. I've been your mortgage holder for years, Brenda. Every payment you've made has been going to me. The silence stretched on for almost 30 seconds. You've been planning this, setting me up. Planning what? Following the same enforcement procedures you've been using against me? Demanding payment of legitimate fees according to established guidelines? This is different. These are people's homes, and my lakefront access is my property right. But that didn't stop you from trying to steal it with bogus rental fees. Brenda's voice got smaller. What do you want? That's simple, Brenda. I want you to withdraw every bogus violation notice, every fraudulent line, every illegal fee you've imposed on me, and every other homeowner in this community. I want you to resign as HOA president. And I want you to publicly apologize for abusing your position to terrorize your neighbors. And if I do that, then I'll work out payment plans for everyone who's behind on legitimate assessments. No foreclosures, no penalties, just reasonable arrangements to bring accounts current. What about my mortgage? I smiled, knowing she couldn't see it, but hoping she could hear it in my voice. Your mortgage gets the same treatment as everyone else's. As long as you comply with community covenants and stop harassing your neighbors, you can stay in your house. But if I don't, then you've got 30 days to find $247,000 to pay off your loan balance, or I'll foreclose on your house and sell it to someone who understands the difference between community leadership and extortion. The emergency HOA meeting was called for that Saturday morning, and every homeowner in Sunset Harbor showed up. The community center was packed with families who'd spent the week learning they were facing foreclosure over HOA fees they barely knew existed. Brenda tried to maintain control by calling the meeting to order and insisting on procedural rules, but she was immediately shouted down by residents who'd had enough of her financial terrorism. Brenda, you've been lying to us about assessments for months? My kids are crying because they think we're losing our house. How could you let this happen? You're supposed to be protecting us. The beautiful part was watching Brenda try to explain the foreclosure crisis without revealing that she'd created it by going to war with the mortgage holder. She couldn't admit that her harassment campaign against me had triggered the enforcement action because that would expose her own illegal behavior. Finally, Tom Rodriguez, an electrician who'd lived in the community for 8 years, stood up and demanded answers. Brenda, we need to know exactly what's going on. Are we really facing foreclosure over HOA fees? Brenda squirmed. There have been some. Administrative complications with our assessment procedures. But I'm working with the mortgage servicer to resolve the situation. What kind of administrative complications? Well, there were some disputes about proper notification procedures and fee structures. I decided it was time to clarify the situation. Actually, Tom, I can answer that question. I stood up from my seat in the back of the room, and 47 pairs of anxious eyes turned toward me. The foreclosure notices were triggered because your HOA board, under Mrs. Walsh's leadership, has been imposing illegal fees and failing to follow proper assessment procedures. When homeowners refused to pay bogus charges, they were marked as delinquent, which created mortgage covenant defaults. Brenda's face went white. Mr. Peterson, you don't have standing to speak about community financial matters. Actually, I do. Peterson Investment Group holds the mortgage notes on every house in this community. I'm the one who authorized the foreclosure notices. The room erupted. Dozens of people started talking at once, asking questions, demanding explanations, trying to understand how their neighbor had become their mortgage holder. Tom Rodriguez held up his hands for quiet. Mr. Peterson, are you saying you can stop the foreclosures? Absolutely. But only if this community is willing to return to legitimate HOA governance instead of the extortion scheme Mrs. Walsh has been running. I walked to the front of the room, facing the same neighbors who'd been terrorized by foreclosure threats because of Brenda's vendetta against me. Here's what I'm proposing. Anyone who's behind on legitimate HOA assessments can work out payment plans with no penalties. Anyone who's been charged bogus fees like waterfront usage charges gets those violations removed immediately. And we elect new HOA leadership that understands the difference between community service and personal power trips. Sarah Chen, a nurse who lived 3 streets over, raised her hand. What about Mrs. Walsh? Is she facing foreclosure too? Brenda looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Mrs. Walsh owes $2,847 in legitimate special assessments, I said. Same payment plan options as everyone else, as long as she stops abusing her position to harass community members. The vote to remove Brenda as HOA president was 231-3. With only Brenda and her 2 remaining board allies voting against the motion. Tom Rodriguez was elected as interim president, and his first official act was to rescind every bogus fee and violation notice Brenda had issued during her reign of terror. Within a week, I'd worked out payment plans for all 47 homeowners facing foreclosure. Most owed less than $1,000 in legitimate assessments, and everyone was grateful for the chance to resolve their obligations without losing their home. But the real satisfaction came from watching Brenda try to adjust to life as an ordinary community member instead of a petty tyrant with enforcement powers. 3 months later, I was enjoying a peaceful evening on my dock, the same dock I'd been maintaining for 15 years when I saw a familiar figure walking along the lakeshore. Brenda Walsh looked older, tired, and completely different from the power-drunk HOA president who'd tried to charge me rent for my own waterfront property. She was walking slowly, hands in her pockets, staring out at the water like she was seeing it for the first time. She stopped when she reached my property line, clearly wanting to say something, but not sure how to start the conversation. "Beautiful evening," I called out from my dock. Brenda looked up, startled. "Oh, Mr. Peterson, I didn't see you there. Would you like to come out on the dock? The sunset's going to be spectacular tonight." She hesitated, then walked down to the water's edge. For the first time since I'd known her, Brenda looked nervous instead of imperious. "Mr. Peterson, I wanted to apologize." "For what, specifically?" "For everything. The fees, the lions, trying to control what you could do with your own property. I lost sight of what community leadership was supposed to be about." I gestured to the peaceful lake where families of ducks were swimming in the evening light. What do you think it's supposed to be about? Helping people, I guess. Making the neighborhood better for everyone instead of trying to control everyone. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. Brenda, do you know what I learned from this whole experience? What's that? That real power isn't about forcing people to do what you want. It's about having the ability to help when help is needed and the wisdom to know the difference. She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I almost destroyed this entire community because I was too arrogant to admit I was wrong. But you didn't destroy it. And now it's stronger than before. 6 months later, Sunset Harbor Estates was thriving under Tom Rodriguez's leadership. Property values had recovered, community events were well attended, and neighbors actually talked to each other instead of filing violation reports. The new HOA board had eliminated most of Brenda's punitive enforcement policies and focused on genuine community improvements, playground upgrades, road maintenance, and a community garden where residents could grow vegetables together. Brenda had paid off her assessment debt and become one of the most helpful volunteers in the community, working quietly on beautification projects and helping elderly residents with yard work. She never ran for HOA office again, but she'd found a different way to serve her neighbors. As for me, I continued managing the Sunset Harbor mortgage portfolio with the same principle I'd learned during our conflict. Real power isn't about control, it's about responsibility. I kept mortgage payments affordable, worked with families facing financial hardship, and used the investment income to fund community improvements through anonymous donations. Last month, the community voted to install a small plaque by the lakeshore, Mirror Lake, a community resource for all residents to enjoy. It was a gentle reminder that some things are too beautiful to own and too important to control. But every evening, when I sit on my dock watching the sunset paint the water in brilliant colors, I remember the lesson Brenda Walsh taught me about power, property rights, and the difference between leadership and tyranny. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes the best revenge is showing them what they could have been all along. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they learn the lesson and become better neighbors than they ever were as petty tyrants. Though I still keep those mortgage notes in a safe place, just in case anyone else gets confused about who really owns what around Mirror Lake.